Oops. So I got cut off. This should be the last chunk of the animal behavior videos. What I finished saying, I believe, was that um, the right, all of our genetics dictate certain things that we will do, but our environment has a very big influence on how those things manifest. The simplest thing to look at is organisms raised in captivity versus in the wild. We see a huge gap between like they have the same skills, but the effectiveness of those skills basically. Um, so some other examples of behaviors that start as genetic and then are slowly learned, imprinting. Cognition is going to be a really interesting one. We'll talk about that. Associative learning, problem solving, spatial learning, and social learnings. Don't write it down right now because I'm going to talk about it in detail. The last part of animal behavior and kind of the highest tier, right? We went from the way that I would think about this is like the very innate behavioral things that they get genetically, and then all the way up to learning, right? We've got the ones that are kind of learned, and then learning itself and the capacity to adapt continuously is basically the highest level of animal behavior. It's why we are at the top of the food chain. We have mastered the art of learning, and we are capable of using that to our advantage to continually stay at the top of the food chain. Learning is basically the modification of behavior based on specific experiences. You can think of this as simply as like we're in school, we learn stuff, and we change based on the stuff we learn, hopefully. Or if you think about it in an experiential way, if you had an interaction with a friend or a significant other or alone and you learn something from that, you're going to change your behavior the next time. A couple examples of learning are maturation. This is due to developing physiological changes. We all go and went through this, puberty. Habituation, loss of responsiveness to stimuli that conveys little or no information. Basically, our ability to cut out things that are not useful stimuli anymore. Spatial learning, which is the modification of behavior based on your spatial environment. For us, it would be like my capacity to get from home to school and around school. That is spatial learning. When I first showed up at KIPP last year, I had a really hard time navigating the school and driving from my apartment to here. Now I'm much more capable of that. Other organisms, right? My ability to find my nest when I've flown away is important, or the ability to avoid certain hazards, or finding prospective mates. That's all spatial learning. Associative learning is going to be behaviors through trial and error. This kind of will be the highest level. We see this in chimps. We see this in humans. Basically trying something until it works. Associative learning, a little bit more about that. There's a couple ways that organisms learn how or get associative learning. This basically is associating a cause with a response or one thing with another. Classical conditioning is going to be an arbitrary stimulus and then it is related to a response. Arbitrary means it has no meaning before that. Pavlov's dog was an experiment where he would ring a bell and bring the dog food. Every time he rang the bell, he would bring the dog food until when he rang the bell, the dog would start salivating automatically, associating that bell with food. Operant conditioning is a kind of more technical way that organisms can learn. This is trial and error learning. It basically associates a behavior with rewards or punishment. On an organismal level, not all organisms can do this. They're not capable of saying, okay, it didn't work the first 5 times, I'm going to move on. But higher level organisms, a lot of mammals can do this. If you want to think about it in a human animal behavior way, when you think about people that you know, there are certain people who can handle operant conditioning. When they do something and they get a negative response, they will change what they are doing. There is, of course, always the outliers, the people who will continually keep doing things that lead to negative responses, and we'll have a really hard time learning that. But that is the 2 different ways that we can kind of gain associative learning as animals. Some other higher level functioning is cognition and problem solving. Cognition is the animal's ability to perceive, store, process, and gather information and then use it in a certain way, specifically to problem solve. Chimps use sticks to basically pry ants out of logs. Otters will crack sea urchins on rocks. Seagulls will drop crabs from very high heights to have them shatter on the rocks to gain the meat out of them. But basically, they're collecting information about their surrounding environment to determine the best way to get what they want. When we talk about natural selection, right, we've talked about all these behaviors. How does this contribute to the organism's success? Genetic components of behaviors evolve through natural selection. So yes, my behavior can change, but the root of it, the genetics of it, can only be passed on when I mate. And the hope is that those behaviors increase my survival and therefore my reproductive success. I know that we talk a lot when we talk about natural selection about the fact that my physical traits can't change and then pass them on, right? When I pass on my hair color, my original hair color is what I'm going to pass on no matter how many times I dye it. My body structure, no matter how much I diet or I gain weight, I will still pass on my original body structure. When it comes to behavior, the initial behavior is what is passed on. The environmental influences that occur later on are not passed on. These are kind of the heavy hitters of evolution that are passed on the most often. Any sort of food-finding behaviors and mate selection are the two kind of core principles that are passed on. A lot of the other ones may be learned or a little bit less important, but these two are the most important. Some terms that I would recommend knowing. When we talk about mate selection, there's a couple different relationship styles essentially that organisms will go through. Monogamous, one pair that stays together forever. Polygamous, one partner mating with multiple other partners. Polygyny and polyandry, which would be one male and many females, or one female and many males. For the sake of brevity, we won't go into homosexual relationships among animal behavior, and they do exist, but the AP test doesn't go over that. If you want to talk about it in class, bring it up, we can chat about it, but for the sake of the AP test, these are the mating selection modes that you need to know about. If you want to take a minute to pause this data and interpret it, as you know, there's tons of data interpretation on the test. Feel free to bring this up in class if you want to. So this is also some data that I would recommend trying to interpret a little bit from here, a little bit from here. See what you can determine from it. This is a video of albatross courtship, a different mating kind of ritual of behavior. You can look up this video if you want to. Mating systems differ among species. I've kind of talked about this. It all depends upon what is most beneficial for the species. What you'll find is that species that require a lot of care for their young will tend more towards monogamous or polygamous relationships where pairs kind of stay together because they need more help supporting the offspring, whereas promiscuous, which is no strong bonds between different pairs, everyone mates with everyone, that usually means that the offspring also don't get a lot of care. So things that produce tons of offspring, right? Fish, insects, things like that, they will probably be more promiscuous relationships as opposed to monogamous relationships. The most common polygamous arrangement is going to be one male with many females. We see this in a herd type situation, but it is also very common for one female to mate with several males as well. This is just a review. If you want to write it down, we've talked about these, some examples, so that if you need to give examples of these, you have them. This one we did not really talk about, but we kind of did, right? The dogs and cats protecting territories and skunks keeping organisms away. Territoriality factors into some sort of communication, essentially. The downside of this is that, and when we talk about big picture, how does this impact evolution? This is not always beneficial. Organisms get really tired protecting their territory. The last thing I want to talk about is altruism. Altruism is defined as a behavior that might decrease individual fitness or decrease my capacity to survive, but increase the fitness of others. Almost all social behaviors are selfish. We just have to accept that all organisms are very selfish. I want to survive. But there are altruistic behaviors that we see. These are most commonly seen in very complex social structures. Social insects like ants, wasps, and bees, they will we talk about, right, the queen bee, the worker bees will sacrifice themselves for the good of the colony, right? We will see altruism in human populations as well. And essentially this means that there's some sort of inclusive fitness going on. Inclusive fitness is a theory that basically says that organisms can improve their overall success as a species by being altruistic. This idea that it's not an individual fitness for every person within the species. Our goal is to perpetuate the species as a whole. And if I am a worker bee and I need to sacrifice myself for the queen who is producing all the offspring, I'm going to be altruistic and sacrifice myself. And so that's something interesting to think about. That kind of borders on more like social studies as opposed to biological studies. But it's an interesting concept to kind of wrap this up with and think about, definitely. You're welcome to kind of pause this. This was just something I find really interesting, right? Where does altruism and being kind factor into our survival as a species? And if you're curious about this, we can definitely have a conversation about it in class. Again, kin selection, this has to do with like mating and things like that. Kin selection refers to natural selection that favors altruistic behavior by enhancing reproductive success of relatives. This means that I'm going out of my way to also pick the mates of my relatives. Again, it supports, right, this inclusive fitness idea that as long as we are surviving together, that's better than just me surviving. You are welcome to kind of sort through this if you want to. This is not something that will be on the test, but I find it very interesting nonetheless. I want to pause here. The last couple slides I'm going to go over in class because we're actually going to do a fruit fly lab that is animal behavior related, and so that will come into play when we actually do the lab, which will be next week. And that is it.